Hello and welcome to a video that a lot of people have been asking me for on social media or in YouTube comments. The question of, what do I think Darksiders 4 might look like? It's taken me a while, but I think I've got a few ideas. Before we explore those ideas though, to start us off, I think we need to take a step back and look at what the first 3 games have offered us, because one of the biggest knee-jerk criticisms of Darksiders 3 is that it has strayed too far from expectations, from what made the first 2 games successful. And whilst I disagree, the whole point of this video is to stay reasonably objective. So, let's take a look at the first 3 games. Darksiders 1 was a God of War / Zelda mashup with combo heavy combat, trainable and upgradable moves, a handful of tools and items, levelling up weapons, slottable weapon perks, fairly distinctive zones and subzones, and obvious dungeons with environmental or upgrade based puzzle elements scattered throughout. Darksiders 2 was more of a Prince of Persia / Legends of Zelda mashup with a lot of RPG elements. It had random loot drops, talent trees you could choose upgrades from to tailor your playstyle, several tools and utility upgrades, trainable combo moves and upgrades, a sprawling environment filled with little side dungeons, and a lot of parkour. A lot of parkour. Darksiders 3 ups the dodge and counter style of combat from Darksiders 2 and mashes it up with a more contained Metroid style world design. It features 4 elemental forms to acquire that provide movement perks and ways of interacting with the environment, as well as changing up the secondary weapon you have equipped on the fly. Weapons can be upgraded with items found out in the world, as well as slotted with enhancements, as in the first game, for both a passive and active effect. It has several visually distinctive zones, each tempered by the deadly sin that lives there, but these are more organically interwoven and connected than in previous games. There are more organic or natural puzzle elements to deal with. Unlike the previous 2 games as well, there's no map, which leads to a greater focus on exploration and landmark usage. So, what are the quote-unquote must-haves for Darksiders 4 to stay true to the series? In my opinion, Darksiders 4 needs to be based on and grounded on 4 structural pillars, and those are the following: combo-focused combat, upgradable weapons and combos, interesting tools and items, and thematic environmental design. There aren't too many games that I've played that feature combo heavy gun combat, and I think gunfire games will have to be exceedingly careful with Darksiders 4 in terms of what genre it actually fits into. We've seen the backlash already as to Darksiders 3 is more of a Souls game than a Zelda game, and how that change in genre, whether it's correct or not, how that has actually affected the reception of the game. All 3 games so far have been third-person action games, but third-person shooters, especially third-person shooters with stick aiming, have never felt particularly good to me, and a lot of people on the PC I can't imagine would really appreciate them. There were brief turret sections in both Darksiders 1 and 2, and they always felt horribly clunky, even if they were often a nice, brief change of pace. This is compounded by the lock-on mechanics for the crossblades in Darksiders 1 and 3. Didn't feel great, especially when you were used to mashing action buttons instead. I can't imagine that they will turn Darksiders 4 into a Gears of War style cover shooter, so realistically that leaves the kind of faster paced Bayonetta or Devil May Cry style of combat. I've often likened, and I'm not the only person to do this, but we've often likened the Four Horsemen to a traditional kind of RPG party, dungeon crawling party. So War is the hulking, greatsword wielding tank character. Death is the more agile, dual scythe wielding rogue. Fury is the mid-ranged whip wielding mage with elemental attacks. And that leaves Strife as the ranged character, the one who stands at the back and, in traditional fantasy, would be using a bow and arrow to pepper an enemy with shots. In Strife's case, obviously, he uses the dual pistols that we know of so far. I suspect that some kind of gun kata inspired martial arts combat would be the coolest route to go. The problem is that whilst it looks good in the movies, third person gun combat has rarely felt particularly impactful to play, which is why, for example, in Bayonetta it's mixed up with a melee combat system as well. And I think they do need to have some kind of melee combat for Strife to keep it in line with the other games in the series, because again, I strongly suspect that in order to get people on board for Darksiders 4, they will need to return to the roots just a little bit more, otherwise the fans are going to lose their shit. Upgradable weapons and combos. From the ending of Darksiders 3, we know that Strife has his guns about 10 years into the apocalypse because we see him using them. We also know from Darksiders 1 and 2 that at some point Strife loses these guns. Ulthane ends up with Mercy, which he gives to War in Darksiders 1, 90 or so years in the future, and Alia in the Forgelands has redemption when Death finishes with the fires in the mountain quests. And there's a few potential choices here for exactly how that comes about. One, I think the devs might hear and take on board some of the fan feedback on forums about the lack of loot drops, and they might decide that Darksiders 4 starts with Strife getting his ass kicked, losing his guns, and then we get loot drops a la Darksiders 2 as he goes off to wherever the fourth game takes place, and he has to replace his guns as he goes. They could do that, but one of my biggest criticisms of Darksiders 2 was that it didn't feel as good switching between all these weapons all the time when we could realistically have been using Harvester, Death's iconic scythe. Or Darksiders 4 might take place during the first 10 years of the apocalypse before we get to see him in Darksiders 3 and we find out what he's been up to. I do kind of feel like that's the least likely scenario, as that would basically mean the game would have the same ending or use and retread a lot of the same material as Darksiders 3, which would, quite frankly, be lame and would suck, and I honestly don't think they would get away with using the same setting and scenario again. Speculation wise, I think Darksiders 4 will take place after the battle for Haven, with Strife doing something. But at some point, Redemption will break and Ulthane won't be able to fix it, so he'll send it magically to the Forgelands, which is why Alia won't know how it appeared by the time that Death gets there in Darksiders 2. And maybe Ulthane doesn't realise the extent that the corruption has taken over the place as well. We don't know. And then, furthermore, I speculate that Strife will give mercy to Ulthane because he will have no need of it in whatever the end game goal of Darksiders 4 is. But he suspects that the Council will send War back to Earth, just like Fury suspects, and that War might have need of the gun with its unlimited ammunition, so he leaves it for War to pick up, or alternatively he loses it at the end of the game due to whatever happens to him, and Ulthane finds it but doesn't know what has happened to Strife. Whatever they do, weapon wise, I think the enhancement system of Darksiders 1 and 3 is the better system, the more interesting system for enhancing weapons, much more so than the possessed weapons system of Darksiders 2. It allows freedom, it allows build diversity, and I do think the upgradable nature of Darksiders 3's enhancements is superior to the flat bonuses from Darksiders 1. I also think that trainable and upgradable combos should return in Darksiders 4, and as an aside, I suspect that if there is a quote-unquote furious edition of Darksiders 3 in a year or so from now, like there has been with Darksiders and Darksiders 2, it's possible. I'd like for those things to return there as well, if not returning in the upcoming DLC. While I didn't really feel the lack of those upgradable combo moves in Darksiders 3, because the flip saw was there and that was mostly what I used all the time in Darksiders 1, I could certainly see room for them in Darksiders 4, even go so far as to have trainable styles. In fact, a skill tree a la Darksiders 2 for certain gun combat styles might work in Darksiders 4's favour. Maybe you could have a tree for focusing on single gun play, while another could focus on dual wielding, the third could be, I don't know, more gadgety, tech magic-y style support play. We don't really know much at all about Strife's capabilities, as he's barely shown in any of the media, and we don't get to see him fight much at all either. He is described as an excellent marksman, so maybe a long-range weapon style would be good for him as well. Interesting tools and items. Let's take stock. War had the Crossblade, the Mask of Shadows, the Voidwalker, the Abyssal Chain, the Earthcaller and Mercy. Death gets the Death Grip, Redemption, the Interdiction Soul Splitter combo, and the Void and Phase Walker, as well as a load of secondary weapons. Fury gets the Flame, Storm, Force and Stasis Hollows, plus the Salvation Crossblade, as well as the Rider's Mercy Talisman that she gets from Ulthane, which she can upgrade by rescuing humans. These upgrades, for the most part, can be split up into three categories. Those for use in combat, those for use in traversing the environment, or those for use in puzzles, but there is plenty of crossover between the three. For example, the Crossblades are used both in combat and to solve puzzles. The Abyssal Chain and Death Grip are used in combat for traversal and to solve puzzles. So naturally, Strife should have similar tools. A grapple to allow him to reach higher vantage points would obviously make some sense as a marksman, so I suspect we'll see something like that included. I also strongly expect some kind of ammunition system as well, maybe different elemental weapons or elemental ammunition types to switch between. A little bit like Fury's Hollows, maybe not like Fury's Hollows, maybe that's too close game-wise to the system of Darksiders 3. I'm going to mention the horse now, because I do think special note should be made of the white horse. After the negative feedback surrounding Rampage's absence in Darksiders 3, unjustified, again in my opinion, I suspect that Darksiders 4 might make more use of whatever the white horse gets to be called, especially if less of the game takes place on Earth. Incidentally, I suspect that Discord might be the name of Strife's horse. And I think that because we've got Ruin, Despair and Rampage, so we've got two horses beginning with R, I think two horses beginning with D, Despair and Discord, would be a nice balance in a series all about balance. So on to our final category, thematic environmental design. Now personally, I love the Metroidy style of exploration presented in Darksiders 3, but I'm very much aware, and people on the forums and social media have made me very much aware, that this really isn't for everybody's taste. So there are a couple of ways to go from this, in my opinion. Either we return completely to the more horizontal plane, dungeon heavy environments of Darksiders 1 and 2, or we head for a similar themed environmental design, dungeons et al., but with a more 3D feel to it, a la the Metroid Prime series of games, including the 3D map from that game, or that series of games. In fact, now I think about it, Samus Aran would be an excellent model for Strife-style gameplay. Can you imagine a Metroid Prime crossed with Zelda-style dungeons game with proper Metroidy power-ups? Can I have that? Can I have that, please, Gunfire Games? Pretty please, that would be awesome. For me, at least, because it's one of my favourite game series. I do think a lot of people would be happy with a compromise between the epic open environments of Darksiders 2 with more places for a horse this time around, and the delving and exploration of Darksiders 3 with a smattering of important dungeons like in Darksiders 1. If that takes us to different planes of existence, even better for a lot of people, I think. Whilst personally I thought the environments in Darksiders 3 were pretty distinctive, from the gross pustulous hives around Sloth to the noxious festering pools near the Angelic Outpost and the fiery caverns near the Lords of Hollow, and the dusty cityscape surrounding Wrath, I do appreciate that it in many ways lacked the gigantic sweeping vistas of Darksiders 2. Darksiders 2 had much bigger areas and grander sites being off-world, but at the expense, in my opinion, of feeling more like padding. Darksiders 1 got the balance right. So those are the 4 pillars, but I'd like to make special note of something that realistically comes within the environmental design, and that is puzzles. I like puzzles in games. I don't like puzzles in games that make no sense within the context of the world. For example, the ball rolling puzzles in Darksiders 2 and all the block pushing nonsense in Darksiders 1. They may well be staples of the Zelda style genre, but I still preferred the more organic approach of Darksiders 3. And yes, I'm aware that Darksiders 3 did have pushable blocks, which I thought stood out way too much as a "we need more puzzles but we can't really find a way of integrating things more naturally, so" style recourse. But of course, how the puzzles are integrated into Darksiders 4 depends entirely on multiple things: where they go with the story, where and when it's set, and the scope of all that is outside of the purview of this video. This is about gameplay and mechanics. I think a lot of people would be happier with a few more puzzles, but as with the Darksiders games before it, puzzle solving and environmental design are meshed in almost completely with weapons, items, upgrades, tools, and combat too. It all comes together. So we'd need more information before we can make any kind of speculation on that. So, about that Metroid Prime style gameplay but in third person without the horrible jankiness of other M? Gunfire? Gunfire Games? Any comments?